Hey guys, welcome. This is the first video from the Lightning Round podcast. Garrett, Jamie. We're here. You get to see our faces. We're doing our 53-man roster predictions today, and we're just going to go ahead and get to it. We might release this as a podcast, might not. We don't know. But we're going to go ahead and start with special teams, do offense, do defense, and who we think is going to make the 53. And we're doing this before the game on Thursday, so you're going to... Maybe things will change Thursday. Probably will, but we're doing it. So you'll probably get this Thursday morning. You'll be able to see and tell us how wrong or right we were.
Hopefully right.
I know. So the first one, of course, and we can go ahead and get started unless you got something to say to the people.
Just want to thank everybody again for downloading the app and for checking out our first video. Obviously, we're new at the video thing, but we'll be rolling out more as we go, and hopefully this content will get better and better, and you guys will enjoy this as much as you do the podcast.
Yeah, why we haven't done video with these faces, I don't know, but here we are, finally. Giving the people what they want. So, special teams. First off is long snapper Mike Wint. We don't have to have a discussion because he's the only person on the list, of course. And then moving on to kicker, it's either Young-Ho Koo or Josh Lambo.
Young-Wei Koo.
I did Ho, didn't I?
You did.
I want to do Ho so bad.
You can't shake Young-Ho.
I want to do Young-Ho so bad.
He wants to do Young-Ho.
Young-Wei Koo or Josh Lambo, and I went Josh Lambo. It doesn't seem like there's been any jump on the depth chart. Josh Lambo has kicked in games, made every kick that he's made. He's had more kicks than Koo has. I'm sure Koo will get more reps come game 4, but I'm going with Josh Lambo as the kicker.
I'm also going with Lambo as the kicker. Like you mentioned, it seems like it's been all Lambo for the most part up until the second half of Saturday's game. And from what I've been reading, Lambo has been getting better and better in practice, and Koo has kind of tailed off and is not winning that competition with the practice kicks like he was early in camp. So I think that position goes to Mr. Lambo.
Okay, so we agree so far. Now punter, Drew Kaiser, Toby Baker.
I think it's Kaiser all the way. He's been booming kicks for the most part in preseason. Baker has not looked good on the opportunities he's had in the preseason, but for the most part, Kaiser's been pretty good. He showed steady improvement last year. He's been building on that so far in training camp and preseason this year, and I think it goes to the guy they drafted instead of the undrafted free agent. I think Kaiser gets the gig. Yeah,
we agree. 3 for 3. Drew Kaiser's the guy. Kaiser had some good kicks, I think, in the first or second game. He kicked like a 60-yarder. Looked pretty good with the kicks he's had. Toby Baker's just been whatever, but I think Drew Kaiser was always going to be the winner of this battle, no matter what Lynn said. I think Kaiser was always going to be their punter come week 1. So we've got Mike Wint as the long snapper, Josh Lambo as the kicker. We've got Drew Kaiser as the punter, and we'll go ahead and move on to quarterbacks, and this is where it becomes a complete bummer for me because I have them keeping 3 quarterbacks. As much as I don't want them to, I've got Philip Rivers on there, I've got Kellen Clemens on there, I've got Cardell Jones on there. I just think that Lynn has said that Kellen Clemens is a starter from day 1. He mentioned
the backup.
Excuse me.
Ooh,
let's hope he's not the starter coming up. The backup since the second game, he said, Kellen Clemens is going to be the backup. Cardell's got a ways to go. And I think that not playing him on Saturday was saying, let's see what we got out of Cardell Jones. Clemens is the lock for the backup role. And Lynn has mentioned keeping 3 quarterbacks multiple times. So I think that if you cut Cardell Jones, another team will probably end up swooping him up anyway. So I think at the end of the day, you want to keep Cardell so that another team doesn't get him. And then you go into the season with 3 quarterbacks, unfortunately.
I agree. I do think they will break camp with 3 quarterbacks. I have the same 3, Rivers, Clemens, and Jones. I think people were reading a little bit too much into Clemens not playing on Saturday. And again, it sounds like he probably won't play on Thursday against the 49ers. I think they know what they have in him, and they're comfortable with what they have in him, and they're going to stick with him as the backup. And as far as Jones, they traded for him. Lynn obviously has the pre-existing relationship with him. He's shown the steady improvement like we talked about on the podcast. They want to keep him around. I don't know that they could cut him at the initial cuts and sneak him onto the practice squad. So I think they will break camp with him as a third quarterback. My guess is they will probably keep him around because I don't know how much he can benefit from spending time on the practice squad at this point. I think he needs to be around Clemens and Phillip as much as he can to learn the terminology and learn the offense and get comfortable with what he's doing. So I think he'll stick around at least for a while. Maybe at some point during the season they try to sneak him on the practice squad once people have their rosters filled out and things have kind of calmed down. But for now, I think they do break camp with 3 quarterbacks, and it's Rivers, Clemens, and Jones.
All right, so moving on to running backs, how many do you have the Chargers carrying?
I have them carrying 3 running backs. I have them obviously carrying Melvin Gordon as the bell cow, the starter. Brandon Oliver is the backup. Nobody's really challenged him as the RB2 at this point. He's looked pretty fresh and explosive in the preseason. I think the team and some fans maybe overrate him a little bit, but he's there. He's going to be the guy. It sounds like he might even get some return opportunities based on what we've seen in the preseason. So Gordon and Oliver are my 2 backs, and this is where things have changed a little. I've been saying for most of the training camp and preseason that I thought Andre Williams was going to wind up winning the 3rd running back role. Now I think Williams looks like he's about 25 years old going on 75 years old. His legs look shot. Looks like he's got cement feet. Just not impressive at all. I've seen enough of him. Haven't seen anything of Barner that I like at all. I have Austin Eckler making this roster after playing a big role in the game plan this week on Saturday. I think he's going to get an even bigger role, and they're going to throw more at him against the 49ers. I think we'll see him return kicks. He'll continue to cover kicks. He's been throwing himself around like he has no regard for his body and pass protection, and he's looked good as a back and as a receiver. So I think he is going to wind up being the big surprise in terms of making the roster as somebody who most people probably didn't give much of a chance. I know I didn't, of making the roster at camp.
Yeah, if it were my choice, I would have gone with Eckler too, but I went a different way. Of course, the same 2, Melvin Gordon as the starter and Brandon Oliver as the RB2. But my RB3, I'm sticking with Kenyon Barner. And the reason I'm sticking with Barner as the 3rd running back, even though he's shown nothing in preseason, is that Barner was one of the first free agents signed under this regime with Anthony Lynn, and on Saturday you saw him return some kicks. I think when Lynn was talking about how Andre Williams, Melvin Gordon, Brandon Oliver, Kenneth Farrell all offer the same things, he talked about a change of pace back, and he mentioned Kenyon Barner. So I think as a returner, he has some value, even though he's shown none so far. I think my gut tells me that they still believe in the signing that they made, and they signed him to a 2-year deal, though not expensive. I still think that they have somewhat of a commitment to him, and I think they end up going with him. So I've got Gordon, I've got Oliver, and we differ here on the RB3. I've got Kenyon Barner. You've got Austin Eckler, though I would have chosen Austin Eckler if it were my choice. So the next one up is fullback, of course, and it's Derek Watt, and there's no discussion there because it's the only fullback. So wide receivers.
Wide receivers, I have the team carrying 5 wide receivers out of camp. First 4 are relatively obvious: Keenan Allen, Travis Benjamin, Tyrell Williams, Dontrell Inman. The 5th one is the surprise. I think the Chargers will leave Mike Williams on the PUP for the first 4 to 5 weeks. Basically, the way that works is you can leave him on the PUP when the season starts. He has to sit for 6 weeks. After 6 weeks' time, he can start practicing. If he practices, he has a 3-week window to practice from week 7 to week 9. If he practices in that window, the Chargers then get a 3-week window to decide whether or not they want to activate him, put him on the IR, or waive him. So I think they will use that to their advantage. I think he will stay on PUP. And I think the surprise here, I think Jeremy Davis winds up making the roster as the 5th receiver. Last week at this time, I had Isaiah Burst making the roster because I thought he was the best punt returner on the team. It's pretty clear to me that Williams has leapfrogged him, and I think Williams being the it's pretty clear to me that Davis has leapfrogged him, and I think Davis being the bigger-bodied, more physical receiver, it seems like they're trying to fit him into that Mike Williams role in the short term, and I think he will be the 5th receiver on the roster.
So, yeah, I actually did the same thing. I've got Mike Williams on the PUP, so of course he won't count against the 53 if he's on the PUP. Keenan Allen, Tyrell Williams, Travis Benjamin, Dontrell Inman, of course. We have the same 4. I also have Jeremy Davis making the team. We talked about it on the podcast, but they put Jeremy Davis in 2 wide receiver sets with Isaiah Burr still active, and of course Travis Benjamin still active, and yet they put Keenan Allen and Jeremy Davis there in 2 wide receiver sets. So they obviously value Jeremy Davis, and with Mike Williams out, they'll need another wide receiver. I actually have them carrying 6, and I have them carrying Isaiah Burr as well as the punt returner, and also with Tyrell Williams banged up right now, with Dontrell Inman banged up right now. I think they break camp, go into week 1 with 6 wide receivers. So I've got Keenan Allen, Tyrell Williams, Travis Benjamin, Dontrell Inman, Jeremy Davis, and Isaiah Burr as the 6 wide receivers.
I almost went with 6 wide receivers myself, but I don't think they'll go that way. So I see where you're coming from, and I could definitely see that happening, but I went with 5.
So Jamal Jones doesn't make it, Mitchell Page doesn't make it, Artavis Scott doesn't make it, but all candidates for the practice squad.
Yeah, I think maybe 2 of those guys at the most wind up making the practice squad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't see Scott or Jamal Jones or Deron Brown or Mitchell Page really making the 53. I think it'd be a stretch at this point.
Yeah, and I think going back to running backs, I think another reason I didn't pick Eckler was because I think he would also be an easy practice squad stash. Just in case Kenny Barner still doesn't cut it, they can call him up. I think he is in a practice squad lock. So you got to make him the team. I hope he does end up making the team. I'm rooting for him, and I hope he has a great game 4. But right now I have Barner. So moving on to tight ends, I have 3. I think it's my turn. I think we're going back for it.
Sure.
I lost track already. I've got 3. Before I had 4, now I have 3. Of course, Antonio Gates, Hunter Henry are the 2 locks. The third one, even though not playing very much, I've got Jeff Cumberland as the third tight end. And he had a very good early camp, and Lynn was raving about him. Even though he talked about what have you done for me lately on the podcast we recorded earlier, he still is a fan of Cumberland. They re-signed Cumberland, and I think they value him. Even though I would like Sean Colkin to make the team as the third tight end, very good blocker, played very good in the backfield as a fullback too. So I would like Colkin as the third tight end, but I think you can get Colkin like Eckler on the practice squad, and you lock up Jeff Cumberland as your third tight end. I've got him carrying 3. McGrath is finally off the roster. Finally.
I have them carrying 4 tight ends. The top 2 are obvious, Gates and Henry. I also have them carrying Jeff Cumberland as a third tight end. I think you mentioned it. They re-signed him as a free agent. They were excited about him last year before he got hurt. They were excited about him in camp this year. And he's got the pre-existing relationship with Anthony Lynn. I think he winds up making the roster even though he's been banged up and we haven't seen much of him, or really any of him in the preseason. I have Sean Colkin making the roster. I think they were always going to go with 4 tight ends. McGrath is a guy you can easily discard. Colkin is a guy you can maybe have play some fullback, play some H-back, play some tight end. He's been fairly effective as a blocker. He's been a good short and mid-range receiving option so far in the preseason. Rivers has thrown to him. All the quarterbacks seem to like throwing to him. We even saw him get a lot of snaps and a lot of play in the training camp practice that we went to together. So I think he's earned a roster spot. I think they have no problem getting rid of Sean McGrath at this point, who at 29 really has improved himself as an NFL tight end. No reason to wait for him. So I think they go with 4 tight ends, Antonio Gates, Hunter Henry, Jeff Cumberland, and Sean Colkin.
So far we've got the same amount of players. I just have 1 extra wide receiver, and you have 1 extra tight end. So moving on to offensive line, and this is a big group. Who do you have? How many do you have them keeping?
I have them keeping 9 offensive linemen. I had them keeping 10 when we first did the 53. I think that's changed a little bit, mainly because I don't think their 10 were keeping. So
that was back when Forrest Lamp was healthy.
Yes. So obviously the starters, you've got Okung, Slauson, Pulley, Wiggins, who has by far and away earned that right guard spot despite everything we said about him leading up to the preseason and the training camp. He was the best offensive lineman on the field in my opinion on Saturday. He's been getting better and better with every rep, and he has earned that job primarily because Dan Feeney has not, but also because Wiggins has played well. And I think Joe Barksdale obviously makes a team. He's their starting right tackle. Behind them, I have Chris Hairston, who's the primary swing tackle. I have Dan Feeney, who's going to be the primary backup at guard and center. I have Tyreek Burwell making it as the second swing tackle. And maybe a little surprise, I'm thinking you probably don't have him on here. I have Brett Boyko making the roster as a 9th offensive lineman. I had Turk on there. Turk is suspended for the first game of the season. When you're suspended, you go on the reserve suspended list. The team gets a roster exemption for you, so he will not count against the roster. They need to carry an extra body. Couldn't help but notice Boyko playing left tackle with the 2s and the 3s on Saturday. He's also played right and left guard at times. They seem to like him. He's been in the system for a couple years. I think by far in terms of consistent production, I think so far he's been the best backup offensive lineman on this roster, and I think he's earned the 9th roster spot. My guess is when Turk comes back, I think they drop Burwell and they keep Boyko because he can play tackle and guard, and it'll give them some versatility. So that's my 9 offensive linemen: Okung, Slauson, Pulley, Wiggins, Barksdale, Feeney, Burwell, Hairston, and Boyko.
I've got him carrying 9 too. Of course, the starters are the same: Russell Okung, Masloss, and Spencer Pulley. Kenny Wiggins, who's been somewhat impressive for Kenny Wiggins, and Joe Barksdale's right tackle. So
you can't bring yourself to compliment him,
I really can't. I can't. I mean, there's in preseason games against the second-team Rams defense, having the game of his career, I just cannot give him credit yet. Though he played well, I'm not going to say he's a starting right guard quite yet. So the starting 5 are the same. I have Dan Feeney, of course, as a backup. Same 2 tackles: Tyreek Burwell and Chris Hairston. Of course, we differ on the guard. I was going between Brett Boyko, Donovan Clark. I ended up selecting Donovan Clark, even though he struggled. He's had some flashes. He flashed last year, but in practice, he's done some good things as well, from what I've seen. So I'm going to go with Donovan Clark as the last guard, and I think once Turk comes back, which we talked about, he doesn't count against the 53. Once Turk comes back, Clark is out. And I think they end up keeping Burwell. So different guards, and that's it for the offense. And 7th-round pick Sam Tevye doesn't make either of our list.
Nope. And we didn't have him making our list when we did the 53 a few weeks ago. Really hasn't done anything to change our minds at this point. So maybe a practice squad candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're moving on to defense, and much like we talked about with Max Turk, same goes for Tenny Palapoy, who's suspended for the first game of the year. So he does not count against the 53. They get a roster exemption. And the defensive line for me is the starters: Corey Liuget, Brandon Mebane, Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, of course. I've got Damian Square. I've got Karan Reed, Jeremiah Tauchu, Darius Philon, and of course, you can't keep the man off, Chris McCain making it as the 9th defensive lineman.
I also have them carrying 9 defensive linemen. Starters are obvious: Bosa, Mebane, Liuget, and Ingram. And I've got Atauchu, Philon, Square making the roster, and McCain making the roster. Palapoy is going to be on the roster once his suspension's over after week 1. In the meantime, I have them carrying Rochelle to carry an extra big body, but I don't think he's going to last on the roster beyond that. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Which means you have Isaac Rochelle over Karan Reed.
Just for 1 week. I think Rochelle is... I think they're going to opt to keep Rochelle over Reed. They're probably going to try to sneak him on the practice squad. Reed has been playing, at least on Saturday, he played primarily with the 3s. He was one of the last defensive line groups to come on the field. He started the preseason with the 2s. He's been steadily falling. I haven't seen a whole lot out of him. I do not think they're going to keep him. So I think they keep Rochelle just because they drafted him, and I think it's easier to say goodbye to a guy like Reed than somebody who you spent a draft pick on at this point.
So it was okay to cut your 7th-round pick, but your 6th-round pick you got to keep.
I think the 6th-round pick is better than the 7th-round pick.
Okay, so we differ there. You've got Karan Reed making it. I've got Karan Reed. You've got Isaac Rochelle. So let's move on to linebackers.
Linebackers, I have the team carrying 6 linebackers. I have them carrying Kyle Emanuel, Corey Toomer, Jatavis Brown, Nigel Harris, Nick DeZubner, and Josh Perry. I still have DeZubner making the roster, although, as I mentioned on the podcast this week, I would keep an eye out for James Onualu. I think DeZubner is quickly working his way down the depth chart, while Onualu is making his way up the depth chart. I think that 6th linebacker spot comes down to those 2 guys. And a lot's going to have to do with how those 2 guys handle themselves in the 4th preseason game. I noticed the team throwing a lot at Onawalu during the third preseason game. He played all three linebacker spots, moved around quite a bit. So I think I'll look for him to play a much larger role and see how much he can handle in terms of the defense during the fourth preseason game. But I think ultimately they'll probably side with DeZubner and try to sneak Onawalu on the practice squad.
So I love this because we're not very close. Usually we're like right on, but we've had some differences, which is nice. So linebackers for me, starters of course at the auto, Kyle Emanuel. You've got Jatavis Brown, Corey Toomer. I've got Nigel Harris making the team as well. I think he's completely jumped Nick DeZubner, but I also think Nick DeZubner makes this team. I think that Coach Lynn, which I forgot his name for a second, Anthony Lynn, has talked about how Nick DeZubner and Corey Toomer were fighting for the starting Mike spot. I don't see them completely ditching DeZubner after talking about last week almost being a starter and got starting time in the preseason. So I think they end up keeping DeZubner, and I have them cutting Josh Perry, and I have them keeping James Onawalu. And I think Joshua Perry has just struggled so much last year, and even this year, he's not doing that great on special teams. They've given a lot to Onawalu, like you mentioned, but also Onawalu was coveted by 17 teams during the process after the draft. And you cut a guy like Onawalu, and another team's going to swoop him up. That's 17 teams that were interested in him at the time. So I think there's another team that wants to take a chance on him. So I don't know if they can afford to cut him. Where a guy like Joshua Perry, maybe a fifth-round pick, a guy that maybe some guys have seen something in, but probably easier
Perry
to sneak
was a third-round pick.
Or a third, what I say?
He was a fourth-round pick. Excuse me.
See, I got it wrong, you got it wrong. We both got it wrong. Josh Perry being a fourth-round pick, maybe people saw something in Josh Perry, but I just think right now he isn't in the coach's good graces. He's getting penalties in preseason. He's not being great on special teams like he was last year, and I just think the writing's on the wall for Josh Perry, and I think he gets cut as a surprise cut.
I went back and forth on that. I thought about it. I just don't think they'll bail on a fourth-round pick quite so soon, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah, it's also not his guy, though. So,
True.
So moving on to corners, cornerbacks, I've got 5. Jason Verrett. I've got Casey Hayward, counting Des King as a corner in this group. I've got them keeping Trevor Williams and also Michael Davis. I think, as you saw on Saturday, Michael Davis got some runs with the ones. You saw Des King has been the starting nickel corner, but on Saturday you saw Trevor Williams as the nickel corner. I think he's the next man up as a boundary corner behind Verrett and Hayward. So I think he's a lock to make this team, and I think Craig Mager gets cut. And I think Trevon Reed, like Lynn said, what have you done for me lately? I think he was referring to Trevon Reed and a couple of these guys that have done good in the past years. But last year Trevon Reed looked pretty good at the end of the year, but he hasn't done anything. He hasn't been that great. He hasn't played any games. He was okay in camp. You heard his name a couple times, but they're raving about Michael Davis. They're talking about the progression of Trevor Williams. So I've got them keeping 5: Verrett, Hayward, King, Trevor Williams, and Michael Davis.
I have the same 5. Yep.
Dang.
No difference here. I think Mager's gone. I think it's hard to keep a Trevon Reed based on the fact that he really hasn't practiced or played in the practice season. As much as most Charger fans were excited to watch him play at the end of last year, and he did flash, I just think they've got guys who are healthy and who are developing and who are producing, and they're going to keep those guys. So my 5 are the same as yours: Verrett, Hayward, Williams, King, and actually in the same exact order: Verrett, Hayward, Williams, King, and Davis.
Yeah, and Trevon Reed may be a practice squad stash if they want to. But the last group here is safeties, and you go ahead and take this one away.
So I've got the team carrying 5 safeties, and I have them carrying, obviously, Jaleel Adai. I have Dwight Lowery starting. I know everybody wants Trey Boston to start. I don't really think he's earned that right. I think they'll rotate, and both those guys will play quite a bit. But I think based on what we saw during the quote-unquote dress rehearsal against the Rams, I think it looks to me like Lowry's got that starting free safety gig locked up. So I've got Adai, Lowry, I've got Trey Boston right behind Lowry. I think those two will rotate quite a bit. And I've got them rounding out the roster with Adrian Phillips and Rayshawn Jenkins. And I had a tough time here because I feel like Dexter McCoyle really outplayed both Phillips and Jenkins in the preseason. He flashed quite a bit. He's been the most consistent special teams player. His tackling has gotten a lot better. He's been the last line of defense, making a lot of tackles the last couple weeks. He had the pick 6. He had the big hit against the Rams. I feel like he really has earned a roster spot, but I just, as much as I want to say I can see it, I just can't see them dropping either Phillips or Jenkins. They were raving about Phillips in the preseason. They love the work he does in the film room and on the practice fields. Granted, he freezes on game day, but hey, he looks good on the practice field. And
you got to pass deflection on Saturday.
Jenkins was, and then the next play he gave up a touchdown. So, and then Jenkins was their 4th-round pick. He was Gus Bradley's guy. They're going to try to fit him, squeeze him into that Cam Chancellor type role at strong safety, playing in the box. Whether or not he fits remains to be seen. He's been invisible in the preseason, but I still think he makes the roster because I just don't see them bailing on a 4th-round pick before he's had a chance to get on the field in a real game. So I think McCoyle is a guy who is a very viable practice squad candidate. I don't think he's a guy the teams are going to be lining up to sign if he gets cut. So I think that's probably their thought process, whereas if they cut Phillips or Jenkins, either one of those guys might be more likely to get signed if they cut him, but I think they can cut McCoyle and reasonably expect to get him on the practice squad.
Yeah, unfortunately, I went the same way, and I struggled just like you. And it's the last group here, and I just went, damn it, come on, I got it. How can I not put McCoyle here? He's played better than Rayshon. He's played better than Adrian Phillips, but they just value those two more. So I've got, of course, Jaleel Addae, Trey Boston, Dwight Lowry, Rayshon Jenkins, Adrian Phillips. McCoyle gets cut, and though McCoyle has played better in the preseason, I just don't see them playing him. I don't see them keeping him. They have him playing as the last safety on the depth chart. They played Adrian Phillips early on, a handful of plays with the ones on Saturday. They gave Rayshon Jenkins some snaps. Even though McCoy was playing ahead of Rayshon Jenkins, still, I don't see them cutting their 4th-round pick. And they were throwing Gus Bradley a bone. That's his guy. So how could you cut Gus Bradley's guy? So, yeah, I got them keeping Addae, Boston, Lowry, Jenkins, Phillips, and hoping McCoyle makes it to the practice squad.
And going back to the linebackers, we did not mention Denzel Perriman being on the IR designated to return. At least I don't think we did.
No, we didn't. No.
So Perriman, obviously everybody knows he's out for probably somewhere near the first half of the season. I think they're saying 8 to 10 weeks at this point. Still hearing conflicting reports. I've heard 6 to 8, 8 to 10. But it sounds like he's going to be somewhere around mid-season. So they're going to put him on the injured reserve with the designation to return.
We're predicting.
We're predicting.
Yeah.
I mean, I would assume because they're talking about him coming back. So the expectation is he will return. So he's a guy who will be back sometime at mid-season, and I think you're looking at a DeZubner or a Perry or one of those two guys, probably DeZubner, not making the roster or not sticking around at that point.
Yeah, that's one we missed. We talked about Mike Williams. We think Mike Williams will go on the PUP, and that, of course, Turk and Palapoy were suspended and won't count against the 53. So that does it. That's the 53. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks for downloading the app. We'll see you next time, guys.
Thanks, guys.